Welcome back. Now, last month, the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Reform and Rural Development, Ms. Thoko Didiza, appointed new members of the KwaZulu-Natal Ingonyama Trust Board, with INkosi Mzimela as the chairperson. The Ingonyama Trust was established in 1994 with a mandate to hold more than 60% of the Zulu nation's land falling under traditional authorities on behalf of the Zulu monarchy for the benefit, material welfare and social well-being of the members of the tribes and communities living on the land. Now, recently, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the Prime Minister of the Zulu nation and monarch, criticized the process of how the board was appointed and also claimed that the Zulu King, MisuZulu Zwelithini, is siding with people who have an agenda of stealing this land. Now, as the talks to find a solution continue, the tension between Prince Buthelezi and King MisuZulu Zwelithini have raised questions on the future of the Ingonyama Trust and Prince Buthelezi's position as the Prime Minister of the Zulu nation. So to help us make sense of some of these developments, we're joined by Professor Musa Xulu, who's a cultural expert and founder of Indonsa Yesizwe think tank. Professor Xulu, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and your viewers. Good morning.
I must say, I'm one of those people who've been watching this with a very, very keen interest. So, Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Thoko Didiza, appointed new members of the Ingonyama Trust Board last month. But how much power does government actually have when it comes to how the trust is run? And of course, the role in appointing the board, whilst the sole trustee is the Zulu King?
Well, as you have said in the beginning, the trust was established in 1994 with the King as the sole trustee. But the trust actually is holding land in trust on behalf of the communities who are in the former KwaZulu homeland land. Basically, the land that was reserved for black people, in this case Zulus, in KwaZulu-Natal. That is 29.67% of the land in KZN. Which also is transferable to 28,000 square kilometers. Now, the ownership of the land, in terms of customary law, belongs to the rural communities whose ancestors occupied the land over many centuries, even before colonialism and apartheid. And the king is appointed as sole trustee. You know how it happens when you hold something in trust, you're holding it on behalf of somebody or for the beneficiation of somebody. Now, the government, because now the trust exists in terms of an act of parliament, which was first passed by the KwaZulu homeland on the 24th of April, 1994, just before the first democratic elections took place. It was then transferred to national government because land reform issues, are actually the competency of national government. And in 1997, the trust was changed a little bit so that His Majesty the King remains the sole trustee and chairperson, but he is also at will to can appoint a proxy who stands for him as a chairperson because maybe of him being busy with this and that. And a board of now 8 people, additional 8 people, which means that there are 9 people. The board itself is appointed by the National Minister of Agriculture and Land Reform. In this case now, today is Mrs. Thoko Didiza. In consultation with His Majesty, the Provincial Premier, as well as the Chairperson of the House of Traditional Leaders in KZN. That is what the Act says. What the Act does not say, maybe overlooks, is the issues that there are about the culture of public consultations that have been the norm in South Africa since 1994, where even when it is not prescribed, you still have to consult with the stakeholders. In this case, according to customary law, the ownership of the land is with the communities, and they are represented by INkosi. we don't hear that the actual owners of the land, in this case, were consulted to constitute the new board or at any other stage. But it becomes an issue now because, Sakina, you will remember that the issues of land and dispossession and land that must come back to the original owners, the black people, has been central to the struggle for liberation since Jan van Riebeeck arrived here in 1652. So it's a very emotive issue that easily stirs emotions as people have attachment to their land, which they feel sometimes that they were robbed. In 1913, black people were left with only 7% of the land. And in 1936, that was extended to 13%. That 13% has not changed at all in South Africa in 2023. So it's still quite problematic, not only for the Zulu people, but for all, especially black people in South Africa, that they just simply have no access, direct access to land, be it through customary law or be it as title holders.
Professor Xulu, as the tension relates to the traditional Prime Minister of the Zulu Nation, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, and the King, MisuZulu Zwelithini, how is that likely to impact what is happening with the Ingonyama Trust, if at all?
Well, the tension has been around Ingonyama Trust and the appointment of this board. There could have been other issues, but it coming to the open has been around the Ingonyama Trust. Now, I can mention in passing that I had wind yesterday that they are going to meet very soon. We have been asking for them to meet and iron out their differences. Be that as it may, Buthelezi's fears is that, for example, INkosi Mzimela, who is now the chairperson of the board, does not have the experience and qualifications to understand the issues of land reform in South Africa. Because there's a lot of legal issues there, there's a lot of customary law, indigenous law, a lot of heritage issues that one has got to understand how it happened and how, what are the current issues in land issues. And therefore, that is his basic tick. And then, of course, His Majesty goes and say, on the other hand, no, I have the sole right to can appoint whoever I want as the chairperson of the board. The other issue, of course, is that there's people, at least 2 or 3, who do not come from KZN in that board. And maybe people are asking on the ground, why are they not going to fix the issues of land in their own territories? Why come to here? And so on. But those are the actions that you find on the ground. Coming back to Buthelezi, he has been fundamental in making sure that His Majesty the King ascends to the throne. He was the initiator of the first meeting that happened way back in 2021, and then in the subsequent meetings that appointed the King as a new King of the Zulus in terms of the 2003 Act. And he has been very supportive of His Majesty the King. And sometimes we felt that maybe he's going overboard. But it's understandable. Now I think his worry is that maybe that now that the king is on the throne, maybe that kind of relationship that they used to have before, consultative in terms of how traditions work in any way, is no longer happening. And therefore, maybe the board is so weak that this land may still be taken by government like it happened in 1994 with all territories of the homelands.
So to that point, do you believe that the king perhaps should have consulted with the traditional prime minister in this regard? And would that have perhaps served in finding perhaps appointment that the traditional prime minister would have been more settled with?
Well, definitely. You know, Sakina, when you talk about the institution of traditional leadership, in its nature, since time immemorial, it is a very consultative and collective institution. There is very little room for an individual to can maneuver and say or take decisions. By the time a king takes decisions, he would have consulted with many structures that are affected, including Amakosi and his traditional prime minister. That is in terms of the traditional leadership system. Now, when we first became aware that there was a problem, this is what was happening. you would have Buthelezi releasing a statement saying that he had a meeting with the king and they've agreed that former Judge Jerome Goenya is going to continue because of legal expertise and the experience of over 20 years of understanding the institution, which he almost ran from scratch. And then, so we have this public statement in the media and everywhere. And then a few hours later, a statement comes from the side of His Majesty saying something else. So you can say that maybe there were these consultations, but they were not finding one another. What needs to happen is that they must sit down in an honest way and find one another, because this is affecting the people on the ground. And you know, KZ and Sakina, people here quite easily can go back to where it was in terms of violence before 1994. So we fear that a lot, and it's encouraging to hear through the grapevines that they plan to meet. And they must also meet and address together the traditional leaders on behalf of communities. They must also meet together and address the Zulu household, so that every key stakeholder in this regard is singing from the same hymn book.
Well, Professor Xulu, thanks so much. I know we've just scratched the surface, and hopefully we'll have more opportunity to speak as these developments take place about what is actually happening. But we appreciate your indulgence this morning in explaining to us what's going on. Professor Musa Xulu talking to us about the Zulu Royal Council's continuing talks on the appointment of the new Ingonyama Trust by Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Ms. Thoko Didiza, last month.